Hey everyone, today I'm going to be talking to you about how to dodge and burn in Photoshop. And dodging and burning is a way to make fine adjustments to the brightness and the brightness of parts of your picture, and fine tuning your picture. So I'm using the picture of the heron that you can download from the dodge and burn assignment in Canvas. And a quick recap of what we did in class. The first thing you want to do always is make your overall adjustments first. So on this picture, I can see if I do adjustments that, excuse me, that the picture is on the darker side. So I'm just gonna do a little bit of overall adjustment to the brightness of the picture. Remember, when you do this, you always want to turn the brightness of your screen all the way up, and so that you're not adjusting for your screen before you start doing this. So I did that. Also, what I did in class is I talked about vibrance, which is over here. It's another adjustment layer, and that just helps bring out some of the overall color in the picture, so that it looks a little bit richer. Okay. Now let's actually talk about the dodge and burn. So that's the newest skill that I want you guys to develop. First, I'm just going to hit the X up here, the little arrows, and what that's going to do is make my screen full size, so I have the maximum size that I can work with and not have to look at the app stream bar. And what I'm going to do is I want to do non-destructive editing, which always means doing something on a particular layer that then I could adjust later. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a special kind of layer that's going to do this. I'm going to go to Layer up on the top, and I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to choose Layer, and I'm going to name it so that I know what layer this is. I'm going to call it Dodge and Burn, just so I can see on the side, like these are called levels and vibrance, so I know this is my Dodge and Burn layer. And the key thing here is under Mode. I'm going to choose Overlay as my mode, and I'll show you why in a second. And I have to click Fill with Overlay, and it's going to fill with what's called 50% gray, so it's a neutral gray. So make sure you name it, choose Overlay from the drop down next to Mode, and click Fill with Overlay and hit OK. And you'll see it over here. Now you'll also see on the right hand side, I'm over here with layers, you'll see where it says overlay. And an overlay means that it's a special way of dealing with a layer. So instead of it being normal, normal just makes things solid. We wouldn't see anything. Layer order matters, so the layer on the top is covering the layers on the bottom. But these are called blending modes, and what blending modes do is instead of just making something solid, it blends it into the layers underneath it, and depending on which blending mode you choose, it will do different things. So if you were to do this and just run your mouse over them, depending on what kind of mode you are using, it does different kinds of things that create different kinds of effects. Now we are going to be using overlay, as I said, and what overlay will do is that if it's something neutral, 50% gray, it does nothing. But if it were darker gray, it's going to darken that part of the image. And if it was a lighter gray, it would lighten that part of the image. That's how it blends into what's underneath it. So we're going to use that to do just that. We want to darken and lighten parts of our image. And the reason we want to do it is that the bird, the heron, is darker than the background. And so the brightness of the trees in the background is drawing our attention. We just want to shift that balance a little bit so that we're looking more at the bird and less at the background. So in order to do that, we want to there's a couple of settings you want to have. You need the colors on your toolbar down at the bottom to be black and white. And you need them to be absolute black and absolute white. That's what this little guy here is. That's a shortcut for that. If I click that, it automatically makes this black and white. You can also flip those with this little arrow. So when we want to lighten something, we're going to use white. When we want to darken it, we're going to use black. So I can flip those back and forth. I can also hit, see if the shortcut key works, X. If I'm back in my move tool and I hit X, that's the shortcut key. for flipping those back and forth, but you can also just use the arrows. And what I'm going to do is actually paint it with a paintbrush. The paintbrush is here in the middle of our toolbar, and we're going to click our paintbrush. And I told you before, if you choose a tool up on the very top, it lets you create some settings for that tool, depending on what tool you click, right? So different tools create different things on the top. So we're in the paintbrush. And what you want to make sure is over here, there's a little picture, and you're going to go to the drop down. That means hitting the little arrow that's here. And that's going to let you set some things up for your paintbrush. Now, we are going to use shortcut keys for the size when we do this, but you want to make sure your hardness is at 0. And that means that the edges of the paintbrush are really soft, as shown in the picture, versus hard, which is 100%, and then it wouldn't blend well. It would be a really hard edge. So you want to make sure it's at 0%, which makes for a very, very soft paintbrush. So that's the first thing you need to set. Hardness at 0. And then you're going to go over here and you're going to change your opacity. Opacity is how see-through something is, and similar, like in this mode, it means how big of a change it makes when we click on it. So I would say put this at 15%. So those are the two settings you want: hardness at 0, opacity at 15%. And you can just either move the slider, or you can type in 15 here and just hit enter. When I hover on the picture, a little circle shows up. That's showing me the size of my paintbrush. And usually you want a paintbrush that is about the size of the area you're working with. And so I'm going to actually make my paintbrush bigger. The first thing I want to do is darken this background. And to make your paintbrush bigger, I told you you could go to size, but that's really hard because I want to be able to see it. So if you look on your keyboard, the shortcut keys for this, if you look to the very right of the letter P on your keyboard, you will see 2 brackets. The bracket on the left makes your brush smaller, and the bracket on the right that I'm hitting is making my brush bigger. So I'm actually going to go with a pretty big brush here, and I'm going to click and drag. And it makes a little bit of a change. That's because the opacity, like I said, is low. That makes the change smaller. And every time I click, so I let go and I click again, it's going to make it darker. It's going to add to that. And what I'm going to do is something called vignetting, fancy name. I'm just going to go around the edges and make them darker. And that is going to draw our attention in. So I'm just kind of going around the edge, and I'm darkening the corners in particular, and I'm just click and drag. And every time I want to make it a little bit darker, I click and drag again. I might just make a little splotch right there because that's really bright. And if you were to look at the change now, I'm here on my layer. If I click the eyeball, that was before, and that is after. So before I made the changes, because when I turn the eyeball off, it makes it invisible. We can't see it. And when I put it back, you can see what kind of change that made. So already it's drawing our attention into the heron more than this. Now I'm going to work on the heron. So when you're painting black, it darkens. I'm going to flip these. So I'm going to hit this little arrow. I'm on my toolbar on the side. I'm down at the colors. I'm going to flip it so white is on the top. That means I'm painting with white. That makes it the primary color. Again, the shortcut for that is X. And I'm going to work on the heron. Now, in order to work on the heron, you would not want to work with a paintbrush this size, because not only would I lighten the heron, but I would also be lightening the trees, and it looks bad. And our whole goal is to make it look good and not look photoshopped. So I'm actually going to zoom in on this to make the heron bigger. One way to do that is to just go down here to the zoom tool, which is at the bottom, and you'll see zoom in is plus on the top. I can hit plus or minus. I'm going to hit plus and just click on the heron and make the heron a little bit bigger. And I'm actually using 2 fingers to drag around just to move it, or you can use the scroll bars to just make sure when I'm working on the heron, I have room and I can get into the small areas. I'm going to go back to my paintbrush, make sure it's white, and I'm going to work on the heron, and I'm going to make my brush smaller so it's about the size of the area I want to work in this case the wing, and I'm going to click and drag, and the wing is going to lighten. And I'm going to lighten in this body area a little bit more because that's where it's darkest. Because I like what's happening here on the wing, but I want to just sort of lighten this inside part in the body. If I want to go and darken just the neck, again, I'm using the brackets next to the P, and I'm making it about the size of the heron, and I'm just going to click and drag over the heron's neck to lighten it. And again, you do that so it looks good. I'm going to add a little bit more brightness here, I think, to bring that out. I'm going to go down to the feet because the feet, whoops, sorry. The feet really do blend into the background because they're the same brightness as the background. So I'm making a much smaller brush. This is why zooming in is so important because it's a really small area. And I'm going to lighten the feet and the leg. I'm making my brush smaller. So I sort of have, my left hand is on the brackets while I do this, and the right hand is on the touchpad, or you could be using a mouse if you have a mouse. And I'm just going to lighten the legs. And you can see I'm being very careful not to paint outside of the area. And I actually think I'm going to just see what happens if I darken this back wing a little bit. So I'm going to flip this to have black on top, make this about the size of the back wing, and just take a, and darken this a little. Now, in areas like this that are all white, you're never going to make the detail come out. That's called being blown out. It's just super bright and nothing will come out that's in much detail. So that's my work on the heron. And now I'm going to go back to looking at the whole picture. I can either go back to my magnifying glass and go to the minus and zoom out, or I'm going to go to view and I'm just going to say fit on screen, and that's going to fit the bird back on the screen. So the picture went from that. So I turned off my dodge and burn layer by hitting the eyeball to that, and you can see it's so much brighter. I actually think I will brighten the neck a little bit more. Oops. I'm going to zoom back in, go back to my brush, and just brighten the neck a little bit more, I think, to bring it out in the face. Go back to view. Oop. Fit on screen. And then it went from that before, so the heron was dark and the trees were in the bright, and now the heron's bright and the trees are dark. And if I were to look at this layer, normally that's actually what I did, right? So you can see when I painted, I literally was painting sort of a dark, when I was painting with black because the opacity was light, I was making the gray darker here, right? And I was making the heron lighter, so I was lightening the gray here, and I darkened that back wing. So that's if I were looking at it in normal mode, that's actually what I did. But when we use it as an overlay, that's the effect it has. So I'm happy with that. And you want to do a little goes a long way. So you want it to, you don't want to overdo it so it looks photoshopped. You're just trying to make your picture look better. That's it. So my final steps are always going to be to save it. I'm going to go to save as, and I'm going to make sure I save my Photoshop file. So I'm going to call it flying heron tutorial. And I'm going to leave it as a Photoshop file and hit OK. That means I can go back and edit it later. Maybe I'm going to look at it tomorrow and be like, you know what? I actually want to still make changes to that. And I could go into any of these layers. I could double click and change my levels again, or I could mess with the dodge and burn layer. But if I'm sure the one I want to hand into me is a JPEG. So first time I save it as a Photoshop, and then I'm going to go to save as second time, save on computer. And this time as the type, I want to choose a JPEG, just the regular JPEG, not the JPEG 2000 or just the regular JPEG. And it'll keep that name, Flying Heron Tutorial. Make sure in all of this that you are saving in your Google Drive. I should have said that at the beginning, but you want to absolutely make sure, because if you're working remotely, um, yeah, you're not going to be able to access anything but the Google Drive. So always check that first. And I'm going to hit save. And it's going to pop up some JPEG settings. And you just want it to be at the maximum JPEG size, which is 12. You can just choose maximum or slide this all the way over or type the number 12 and hit OK. And that's it. I'm all done. I'm going to quit this. So I'm going to hit escape. That's going to take me out of full screen mode. And I'm just going to go to File and Exit. And you always want to do that because it will prompt you to save it if you haven't saved it. And then I'm going to go up here to the Adobe AppStream bar and click the down on the far right just so I can log out of my session. I'm going to hit End Session, and I'm done. All right, good luck.